belonged to David's house and family line, and so he went from Nazareth to Bethlehem to pay his taxes, and he went to be enrolled together with Mary, who was promised to him in marriage and was pregnant. And something that's always amazed me about this story, and it doesn't mention it in Matthew or in Luke, it is never mentioned how Mary was lucky to live long enough to give birth. At the time, in that culture, an unwed pregnant woman was in serious danger of losing her life. The men of the village would have taken her out and stoned her to death because she would have been unclean. But still, when the angel Gabriel comes to Mary to tell her the news, the first thing he says is, "Fear not. Fear not. Don't be afraid." Joseph's treatment of her saved her from this death sentence. Literally, Joseph was the key to this whole story. And even before an angel appeared to him saying, "Fear not," Joseph was going to divorce her in secret to save her life. Okay, he was going to put her away in secret so as not to bring shame on her and not to have the men of the village after her. But when the angel does appear to Joseph, the first thing he says to him is, "Fear not." But Joseph does accept her. And the time comes to go and pay their taxes to Caesar in Bethlehem, and Mary goes into labor. And I feel so bad for Mary because she doesn't go into labor at home. She doesn't go into labor amongst familiar surroundings. She doesn't go into labor with her own family there to support her. No, she goes into labor in a stranger's home. It was Joseph's family, but they were strangers to her. And Joseph's family was probably not thrilled about the fact that his unwed fiance was having a baby that was not his. If there was ever a basis for a reality TV show, y'all, it was this story. But Luke says that she gave birth to her firstborn child, a son, wrapped him snugly, and laid him in a manger because there was no place for them in the guest room. The baby was born. This, in the eyes of everyone but Mary and Joseph, this sign of shame to Mary. And he lets loose with his first cry, and his parents are relieved to hear that first cry. Whoever wrote the song Silent Night was never present for the birth of a child. Jesus cried and he screamed, and his lungs filled with air, and Joseph got some clean rags and somehow figured out how to swaddle him up nice and snug. And if Joseph was anything like me, he was swearing a lot while he was trying to get this figured out. And Mary, I'm sure she feeds him. She's lying there and she feeds him, and she holds him close to her, and they drift off to sleep together. And that paints a beautiful picture for me. But meanwhile, nearby there are shepherds living in the fields, guarding their sheep, and the Lord's angel stood before them, and the Lord's glory shone around them, and they were terrified. Now, despite what Charlie Brown and the rest of the Peanuts gang would have us believe, this was not a cozy, comfortable story that would have been told around the campfire with knowing looks and nods and nostalgia and just this, this warm feeling in your heart. Ah, yes, that's how it would have been. No. Luke's original audience would have been flabbergasted at the setting and the characters of this scene. I mean, this story would have been more along the lines of one of these epic movies that we go to see where there's a plot twist that you never saw coming, and you walk outside the theater going, because you just never saw it coming. See, sparsely populated places in the countryside throughout the Roman Empire, they were havens for vagabonds and thieves. And shepherds, believe it or not, fit right in with this crowd, with the vagabonds and thieves. The Common English Version says that the shepherds were living in the fields. Okay, shepherds were a transient people. These men lived outside where they could tend their sheep and guard them, not just from animals, but also from marauders. And aside from thieves and wild animals, settled villagers never wanted to see shepherds come near. They were seen as vagabonds themselves, without a home and not to be trusted. And they were usually had a scruffy and unkempt appearance and a fragrance that was usually worse than the sheep that they kept, y'all. The guys lived outside. And they were a violent-prone group. They were always ready for a fight. Because if you can imagine having to survive, knowing that nobody else had your back and you had to survive on your own or die trying, you would be ready for a fight too. They were ready to fight with villagers or thieves or anyone else that they deemed a threat, and these fights would escalate quickly into unmatched brutality, and they fought dirty and desperately because they were on their own, and they knew they were on their own. And with this reality in mind, okay, these are the shepherds that the people of the time knew. We see that angelic chorus appear to these men that lived outside, these vagabonds. On earth, peace among those whom he favors. That message, those whom God favors, that message was for these shepherds. God favored these shepherds. One of the most violent groups in one of the most violent and dangerous places imaginable at the time. The very first message delivered were to the lowliest of the low. And so these shepherds, these men who were part of a despised and dangerous group, they decided for themselves to go to Bethlehem and find and glorify this child. They had always been alone and despised, and yet God singled them out for this announcement. And they felt special. Probably for the first time ever, they felt special, and they felt like they were given hope and love for the first time. And they were told, fear not. These men lived in fear, knowing that no one had their back, surviving in the wilderness like a lot of people survive on the streets today. And these men took on the positive image for themselves that we now use for Jesus as the Good Shepherd. God called them out to see the great sight of this newborn baby. And unlike the priest Zechariah, John the Baptist's dad, if you remember that story, when God first told him he was going to have a son, Zechariah said, no, we're not. That's not right. I mean, he denied it. He didn't think it was possible. And Mary, Jesus' own mother, when she was first brought the message, she said, what are you talking about? That's not going to be possible. But these shepherds who had always lived and died by how well they could overpower their enemy, they received this news, and they immediately went to go and see about the news that was just delivered to them. They immediately took action. They were the most unlikely characters of the entire scene, and yet somehow, because of their actions probably, these shepherds are synonymous with the image of the caring God. And the angels told them, fear not. First thing they told them, fear not. Now the angels say that there wasn't anything to be afraid of. They just said to not be afraid. When we're afraid, we become the smallest versions of ourselves. We become less open, less generous, less kind, less joyful, less loving. We become desperate and we become confrontational. We become defensive. But the angels come to us and they say, do not be afraid. They bring us word from another world where fear has no power. Because there's another way other than fear, and that is love. And that love looks like the very thing that we're afraid of, to be vulnerable, to be weak, to admit to be dependent on someone else. It looks like the mom going into labor in this house full of strangers who all disapprove of her. And she goes to the doors of death. Every time a mother, we forget this in today's world, but a lot of women didn't survive childbirth. She went to death's door to bring that life into the world. This love looks like an adoptive father who welcomes someone else's son as his own. And it looks like this baby, this newborn, weak little baby who is defenseless without his parents. And it looks like these shepherds, these lowly shepherds who never had a friend, coming to see this baby and knowing fully well that there was a good chance they would be turned away because they were used to being turned away from wherever they landed. But they went anyway. They were vulnerable to Mary and Joseph, and I am sure much to their surprise, they were welcomed. The shepherds show us what it is to have something to be afraid of, but not to be afraid of it. And today, there's plenty in this world to fear. We've got out of control inflation. The cost of living keeps getting higher and higher until we wonder, will there come a time where we won't be able to afford to eat, where we won't be able to afford the roof that is over our heads, and we'll become wanderers like the shepherds were? We have student loans. We have diseases, we have cancer, we have addiction, we have dementia, we have this whole plethora of things that we need to be afraid of. But what we must remember is in the morning, a child is born to us. This child is given to us, and his name is Emmanuel, God with us. Jesus was born so that God is with us every single day, in every single minute. And it's so astonishing. But despite the absurdity of that thought that God is with us because of the birth of this one child, despite the doubts we might have, it doesn't matter because the angels are still singing to us, don't be afraid. You're not alone. Don't be afraid. Amen. We're going to sing one more.